Welcome into the Nutmeg Tavern. We are live, and I've got the nutmeg, and I've got the grater, and I would start grinding on this, but some people say that sound irritates them. Here, we'll just, there.
Plenty of nutmeg.
I got the nutmeg in the tea. Welcome. This is going to be an episode like no other. I guarantee it. Because everything's been broken and water's squirting out of things and everything's broken here. So my preparation hasn't been exactly like I wanted. But that just means that we're going to be doing something extra special. And that is we are going to be brainstorming through the next episode that we'll be doing on Townsend's. This won't be on Sunday, it'll be, right after that, basically. And I've been working on this episode, this cooking episode, basically, and here's like 30 pages of primary research that I've already done. And basically, this is some of the raw stuff that I work with when I just start kind of gathering all the information together. A lot of episodes work like this. And when I do kind of larger episodes, and you might think that depending on what kind of research I do, I just kind of, search the internet, look at what blogs or books have covered the topic and kind of work from them. That is, 19th, 20th, 21st century stuff. It is not primary research, it's secondary and tertiary, and, who knows how many times it's kind of gotten watered down. I generally, 95% of the research I do is, I just skip all that. I work backwards from 1700 and move forward and generally kind of stop. And I generally just do not look at anybody's modern research because you really need to know what's going on. And the topic for this episode and the episode that we're really going to be working on here is hot drinks of our time period, the 18th century. What are people drinking that are hot drinks because it's wintertime and they want to warm up? Now, today, we don't think too much about hot drinks. There are the cozy aspects of, it's wintertime, there's snow outside, I'm going to sit by a wood fire and I'm going to drink hot chocolate, Even like Calvin and Hobbes it shows that exact thing. They go outside and they play, and they come inside and they sit by the fire and they drink hot chocolate. We don't really need hot drinks for that reason because we live in very, very climate-controlled environments. Not only our houses, our workplaces, our cars. We have perfect attire if we want to be outside. The 18th century is not like that. Most places, they do not have great quantities of heating, and so people are cold in the wintertime, and they want something to warm them up. Not just to be cozy, but because they want to feel warm, and you warm your inner core with warm liquids sometimes, and that feels better. Whether that's actually good for us or not, I don't know. That's modern stuff. I generally don't pay that much of attention to it, but they certainly think about that in the 18th century. Sometimes there's the warmness of an alcoholic beverage, which we know pretty much in modern medical things that's not actually good for you, but of course they had those kinds of thoughts in time period too. They don't come out as much in the research as you would think. But I thought today we would work through some of these primary documentation pieces, kind of run back and forth. I'll tell you what I think about it, and you'll kind of hear a lot of the episode, but this is going to be in kind of a very raw form. And I wanted the chance for you to interact with some of this raw information and ask questions about it as much as you want in the chat. And Lauren and Ivy will, do their best to filter some of that to me. I can't, do both and read it and all that good stuff at the same time. Of course, they can chime in on that. Now, obviously, we have the classic warm standard beverages that we are all used to: coffee, tea, and in the time period, they drank chocolate as a breakfast thing, and usually it was kind of a heated beverage, a lot like coffee and tea. That's the way to infuse that. And if you want true flavors, you want them to burst out, you want them to be warm. Our palate really takes warm flavors, and they're more intense than cold flavors. So, we just want those cool things in hot weather. They wouldn't drink something like a cold flavored drink in the wintertime. That doesn't make any sense at all. Today we do it all the time. So we've got those drinks that are standard. We'll talk about those in the episode, but I wanted to kind of hit on those classic warm alcoholic beverages, because we're here in the tavern, right? And that's where the bulk of this research so far has been done. And it's classic. So today, what are we thinking? We've got an idea of a drink called a hot toddy. Okay, that's got some interesting research to it, and we'll maybe talk a little bit about that. I don't have a ton on hot toddy necessarily. And maybe the idea, and this is a perfect example of that research idea of not leaning too much on modern research, hot buttered rum. Have you ever heard of a hot buttered rum? Hot buttered rum is really interesting in this kind of mixed kind of maybe mythos, right? So we think of, it's like hot buttered rum. That sounds like something you'd find from, the 18th century, right? Well, you'd be wrong on hot buttered rum, at least as far as I've been able to. Obviously, I could probably spend a month trying to track down the root, and I truly mean a month, tracking down, and I can't make episodes every week if I'm spending a month on one, or even a month on figuring out a sliver of one. But hot buttered rum shows up in a historical novel called The Northwest Passage. That's got something to do with French and Indian War, I think. Pretty sure, because there's Rogers Rangers in it. What are you trying to get? Thank you. Rogers Rangers in it, and blah, blah, blah. So if you read it, it's actually written, a historical novel written in 1937. You could correct me if I'm wrong on that one if you'd like. It shows up there, and the guy talks about, it's like, no, you mix it like this in the novel. And you have butter in it. And the reason why we have butter in it is because it's good for a long time. It fills you up. And it's like, guess what? They didn't have... At least if you search it as hot buttered rum, you will not find it in the 18th century. It starts showing up as a drink in, say, like 1898 maybe. That's as far back as I could trace it easily in a short period of time. Obviously, it's one of those drinks that somebody thought, they're writing this historical novel in the 1930s. He says, oh, that sounds exactly like what they would have had. And he writes it into the novel. And people project it back into time period thinking that that's real, and it's not, at least as far as I can find out.
And sometimes what was it you were talking about earlier? Sometimes you find out later it was just going by a different name.
Yes, well, that's so true.
Just like, maybe when we were looking for soup, and you're like, well, maybe I should be spelling this with 2 O's, and even just a completely different name, maybe not just a different spelling, but sometimes that happens.
So we're finding out, as you research kind of a bigger topic like this one, because it's got a lot of different components to it, the research for it is a lot of working backwards, finding words and misspellings and tricky ways of kind of getting into the topic. And sometimes what I will reference it as is you won't strike gold, right, or oil until you hit a rich vein of a new way of searching or a new place of searching, and then all of a sudden, a big seam opens up, and you'll find a great quantity of information where you didn't expect it. And we've got some of that in this. So here are the yes.
Okay, are you going to break for some questions?
Yeah, I'll breathe. You talk.
Okay, so somebody was wondering about the name for the item where you heated it up and you plunged it into the drink to reheat it.
Right. So we would call that a toddy rod because of hot toddies. Right? Here's a rod, but they wouldn't have called it that. I think you could probably search until your eyes bled, and you will not find them calling that necessarily that in our time period. Probably into the 19th century, who knows when. This might be called a mulling poker, or just a hot poker, or a mulling stick.
Or a flip dog.
A flip dog, right? So you've got all these different terms that you could search for this, and they who knows? Maybe every tavern in the 18th century, or whatever you want to call it, right? They had 10 terms for a tavern. They might have each had a different name for this. And so as you're searching for it, and we're talking about so much of this is not high society, it's very, very rustic language. And so euphemisms and little nicknames for things, they just, it's so hard to research. And so many of these things aren't necessarily written in our time period. So you can do a lot of searching and, you pass over things not realizing they're talking about this thing, or they didn't give it a name at all.
Somebody was wondering if they would drink stock or bone broth.
So this is kind of, it's ancillary to this topic, but there are medicinal drinks, and some of these are medicinal. In fact, maybe everything seems like a lot of things start off as medicinal and then they turn into non-medicinal things. Coca-Cola, great example. It's medicine. And then later on, it's like, what are you talking about? It's medicine. It's terrible for you. Broths, a lot of times they'll show up medicinally, and I talked about that in the chicken soup episode where they used a chicken broth, and you'll see just broth recipes and references in medicinal books talking about restorative broths, and they tend to be a clear liquid, right? So some things, like you'll get a urinary tract infection today and they'll say, well, don't eat solid food, drink a clear broth. And same thing going on in the 18th century. You'll eat regular food and it makes you feel terrible, but you can digest clear broths. And they knew that in the time period, and very, very medicinal. Usually you'll see more references medicinally than just as a meal.
Somebody was wondering about hot mead, so mead that has just been heated up.
So mead in our time period, and I have not searched for mead specifically. It was a good question, and I should probably write a note.
Right?
I'm writing a note right now. Mead, right? Mead is more of a 16th and 17th century thing, and it's a lot less popular in the 18th century. You'll find mostly where it's mentioned in cookbooks and stuff as a earlier, it's like you'll get old, like you would look in cookbooks today and you'd find recipes that were really more popular in the 50s. Our cookbooks, of course, are more quick to weed out those old recipes. You don't probably find too many recipes today in cookbooks that have Jell-O with, fruit cocktail in it and bananas. Don't do that anymore. But you'd see that a lot more in the 18th century. You'd see 17th century recipes showing up, and mead would show up like that. I haven't seen too many like heated mead things, but I can look that up.
Mm-hmm. And somebody was wondering about warmed milk.
This is a really good question about, there is a reference in William Byrd's diaries that he writes in the early 18th century, and he talks about eating boiled milk for breakfast many, many times. But I'm pretty sure that he's just shortening a term as a boiled milk porridge. I'm pretty sure that's what he's actually eating, and many times they'll do a drink or something that it'll have oatmeal in it as a thickener, and they don't really mention it in the title. So I think they do have a lot of heated things like that. Possibly just milk as a warmed up beverage. There's some references, but not a lot.
And have you researched into wassail yet?
So, wassail is going to be. We did a wassail episode
long ago.
Right?
Yeah.
It was probably in the first 20 live streams we did, and we've done 400 live streams. And you'll have to hold on, bear with me because it's been 3 years on that or more. Maybe it was done 5 years ago. But wassail is very regional and it's earlier. So 16th, 17th century, maybe even earlier than that. And the term has disappeared by the 18th century, or it's only referred to historically. And then there's this big sentimental, historical, thing that goes on in the 19th century where they start to hearken back to those things. I mean, even like Dickens is kind of partially like that. He harkens back to the 18th century. But there's this romantic period in literature, and not just literature, but in cultural things, like the Scots trying to reclaim all these family names. And those things had really died out in the 18th century, and they had to, they were skipping back into the 17th and 16th century to reclaim some of that culture that they had felt like they had lost. And there's references to wassail in the 19th century and the 20th century, but you don't see it in the 18th century because they're skipping over that time period. Now, that doesn't mean that the concept isn't there or even the drink is there, because it just gets renamed. Lauren was talking about that idea of spelling. Well, it's not just spelling. It is so different than that because it's a whole name thing that goes on. The popularity of a dish or of a drink kind of stays the same, and its name weaves in and out of history, and it makes it almost impossible to do the research. Now, a good example of that is hot toddy. It's a very generic name, probably in the 19th century, meaning just sort of a hot alcoholic beverage. But if you look back into the early 18th century, toddy was a very, very specific kind of a drink, and it totally changes. It just turns from a very, very specific, made out of like coconut tree sap or something, right? I mean, and it has to be Southeast Asia, to, it just means any alcoholic, whatever, right? So it just completely changes a name. I think curry would do the same thing. It means something very, very specific and then just churns into something, a much more general term.
You take a drink.
I've had a congestion and sore throat, so if I cough and all this good stuff, I'm sorry about that.
Somebody was wondering if you'd run across any instances of people just talking about drinking hot water to warm up.
Maybe as we went through some of this, we will see some references to just kind of generic warmed liquids, and then they kind of get a little more specific at times. Just straight up hot water, I don't think so. Possibly in a very only medicinal situation. And some of these are actual medical texts, sort of like, not texts, but they're like, in the time period, they would do a lot of medical anecdotes. They would say, well, we had this, here's this person was sick like this, and they tried this, and then they tried that, and then they tried that, and then they died. It
didn't work.
Yeah, right? And you're like, I'm not sure how I learned anything from that. I don't know whether the first thing killed him or the last thing killed him, but they would tell these stories, and you're supposed to kind of get something from it. So there might be some references to that, but I don't see it too often. I think they would generally say, oh, just water, that's not going to be good for you. It needs to be something else.
So a couple questions about sweeteners. Someone was wondering if they used molasses in the drinks, and somebody was wondering if they used raw honey for medicinal purposes, and somebody else was wondering if we were going to plant maple trees by the cabin, and I assumed it was so we could make maple syrup.
Duh, why else?
Why else?
Generally, when they write about it, they just mention white sugar, sometimes brown sugar, occasionally molasses, and at least in one reference where they're talking about things specifically in North America, because a lot of this is English-based, there just isn't as much written about the North American context as I want. That's easy to find until you get to the 19th century. But there's a specific drink, I think it's the one that talks about using spruce beer and whiskey and maple syrup, right? And it's got a specific name to it, and I would have to find that. But so maple syrup, sometimes you find that molasses thing going on there. Molasses carries so much flavor in with it, and not necessarily one that you want.
Yeah. Okay, Dad, could you move the candle that is on the one with the tall flame? Could you move it a little farther away from
Am I trying to catch fire?
Just
is everybody worried?
There you go. just a little farther away. No, we're good. Okay. Somebody was wondering if you'd run across any instances of lemon ginger tea, because that's so common now.
There are some medicinal teas, specifically herbal teas. I don't have a lot in here. Now, it does remind me of one of the funny things. One of the drinks that I wanted to, I didn't think I would find, and I did find, but I had to look in a different way, kind of come around it from sideways, was the idea of putting alcoholic beverages into, specifically brandy, into tea or coffee. And it is here. I thought that was going to be one of those, like, well, who's going to write about that? But it's in the Dictionary of the Vulgar Tongue, where he talks about the name for that is putting French cream into your coffee or tea. It's like, oh, put some French cream into that, which is a euphemism for brandy or some other alcoholic beverage. So there is that also as a...
Okay, so somebody has a question that is off topic, and it is, how important was beef tallow and lard in the time period? Was it used just for cooking, or were there other uses like fuel or lighting or crafts and that sort of thing?
So related, it reminds me, so before we moved the topic of this episode, it was going to be a Q&A.
Yes.
And one of the Q&A questions was?
Oh, yes. I think it's on the other side of my sheet that I've been writing on. What kind of oil should we try? What's most authentic? Will it be lard? And then there's another question, I think, later.
It's the other one.
Mm-hmm. Is it possible to use normal fat rather than just the suet?
No. What's the other question?
Oh, I don't know.
The one about butter.
Oh, yes. Hold on. How would any of these recipes hold up without the butter? Serious question.
Right. How would any of these recipes hold up without the butter? Serious question. They wouldn't.
No.
That's why they've got butter in them.
That is the core ingredient.
Butter. Butter is how you make things taste good. Hello.
Like, in fact, if it's just butter, that'll pretty much just do it.
That's right. So, tallow, lard, incredibly important commodity component within households in the 18th century. Yes, it's used as a fuel if you really need it. Yes, it's used in food. We would think, it's like, oh, why you get rid of all that fat? What are you talking about? Get rid of that fat? Like today we're worried about, you don't want to pour all that grease down the drain because it'll plug up your, ruin your drains,
the plumbing. Don't want to
ruin your plumbing. It'll, mess. It's like in the 18th century, what are you doing? Why are you throwing
all
it
the
away?
good stuff.
That's like, well, every time I try to flush one of these gold bars down our toilet, it stuffs it up. Well, why would you flush a gold bar down a toilet? Same thing with the 18th century. Why would you try to get rid of your waste oils? Because they're not waste. You're going to keep them. You're going to use them. Maybe you want to grease a hinge. Maybe you want to do this or that. They don't have petroleum products that are just squirting out of the ground and turning it into whatever 3-in-1 oil. It's just not like that. And so all those waste oils are not waste oils.
And there are grease lamps specifically just for using up those kitchen oils and just...
And maybe you waterproof something with it. Maybe you, whatever, turn it into a candle, whatever.
Okay. This question, let me see if I scribbled it, so here we go. Were there any food, drinks, or styles prominent in colonial French Canada that were then adapted to the American colonies?
Probably specifically the one that's done with spruce beer and whiskey. That's probably the one that has maple syrup in it. Yeah. I can't remember the name for that one. Again, I got 30 pages and I'll probably never find it. And that one was interesting enough in that it shows up in dictionaries in Great Britain, but pointing back to it. Sorry, but my eyes don't focus like they used to. Oh, here's, remind me to get back to that one. Braggot. Braggot is a drink made with mead and ale sweetened with honey. So people had a question about mead.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Braggot. And I don't know if braggot is specifically warmed up or not. That's probably not specifically. That one's interesting. There's too many that are good here. Oh yeah, here we go. Calibogus. It's probably got more than one reference in here, but Calibogus, rum and spruce beer. But there's another one that has spruce beer in it, and it's sweetened. And maybe Calibogus is one that's also sweetened with maple syrup. There's so much here, so much. Go ahead if you have another one.
Okay. Somebody was wondering if spices were used medicinally, specifically as an addition to drinks like pepper or other spices, but pepper specifically.
At least medicinally, a lot of these don't mention spices too much, other than you might see nutmeg in a punch, and but there is spiced wine or burnt wine, and many times that will have something like a cinnamon in it, and possibly something like nutmeg also. Whew.
Okay, this is an off-topic question, but with so many cows in America, why is it so hard to get beef suet? And somebody else was saying up earlier that at least where they are, their local market sells beef fat for 99 cents per pound. And how kind of them, because it can be hard to find some of the, like, just bones or...
Well, and you got to be careful. Beef fat isn't necessarily suet.
Well, I was relating those things. They're not necessarily right, but I was just thinking that it can be hard to find some of the, like the fat and the bones. Sometimes you just got to know a good butcher or know someone who processes their own animals.
Yeah, look for a processing plant. Look for a, meat locker, anybody who actually deals with the initial processing, and you want to find a small operation. And if you talk to them specifically, it's like, I need a this or a that. Generally, they can, at least here, can help you out. I went to a place and it's like, well, I need 10 pounds of suet. It's like, oh, okay, come back on Tuesday and then we'll have it for you.
Right. It could be that we're in a state with
Yeah, it depends on.
Yeah, could be that
be
our
very-
rules in our area are light, but it is so beneficial to know someone who is processing the animal themselves, because you can get organ meats, things that are just harder to get on the general market.
Right. Here's another specifically North American thing that may be kind of Canada related because it's specifically got spruce beer in it, and that's a drink called swizzle. It says a drink or any brisk or windy liquor in North America, a mixture of spruce beer, rum, and sugar was so called. The 17th Regiment had a society called the Swizzle Club at Ticonderoga in 1760. Yeah, and here's a mulled wine. We were talking about, using spices. Grate half a nutmeg into a pint of wine. Sweeten it to your taste with loaf sugar, which is white sugar. Set it over the fire. When it boils, take it off to cool. Beat the yolks of 4 eggs exceedingly well and add them to a little cold wine, and then mix them carefully with your hot wine. So you're doing that tempering thing going on there. A little at a time, then pour it backwards and forwards several times till it looks fine and bright. Then set it on the fire and heat it a little at a time for several times till it's quite hot and pretty thick, and pour it backwards and forwards several times, and then send it in chocolate cups. So probably a little whatever. Serve it up with dry toast in long, narrow pieces, probably so you can dip it.
Like a biscuit.
And this mulled wine also has cloves in it down here. So, there's definitely those. This one's got cinnamon in it. A little bit more spicy. The other, standard punches generally have a citrus thing going on. Sometimes orange, usually lemon.
Any lime?
No.
Okay, we're going to break for the halfway.
Yes, we're there. We're past the halfway mark. Woo. Okay. Every week I try to get to brand new members, renewing members, and Patreon folks. I'd always miss that last name. Anyway, brand new and renewing YouTube. Jerry's Makeup and More, Ryan Apple, Jody Crabtree, Susan Leeway, Rita Loy, Abraham Rathrock, Norman Yerby, then a new Patreon person, Robert Vigliano, and there was one that I missed. So, because of my bad technology. Now, we'll come back to this. I mean, we've only scratched the surface on that. But we want to talk a little bit about the stuff here because it's December. So we talked about some of these mugs recently, Nutmeg Tavern mugs. They got the winter logo with the prancing deer like over my shoulder there. The Grand Union with the red, white, and blue. The ones that's kind of like a robin's egg.
Blackbird's egg.
Yeah, actually it's closer to a blackbird's egg, so we named it that. Brand new mug that just showed up here. This one's got the flavor of the 18th century logo, and it's actually a nutmeg tree on there. And this one's very interesting. It's got this.
I don't know how the color comes out, but it's kind of a lime green.
Yeah, it's kind of a lime green. It looks yellow on this screen,
it does.
but it's a matte black.
I liked how the two colors went together.
Yeah, the matte black with the kind of limey yellow green. You would think, ugh, but actually it's pretty darn cool and a very interesting shape to it.
Yeah, this one's one of the smaller sized ones.
Yeah, and
I try to get a variety of
some of
sizes.
them even have a signature on
yeah,
the bottom.
well, we try hard to get
Crazy.
signatures on the bottom.
Anyway, those are available on our website. Obviously, we also and our great musical instrument. We have these wonderful pewter mugs. Actually, we'll call it pewter-like mugs. Pewter-like mugs.
Pewter-like mugs.
We do have wonderful teas available on our website. There's black bohea tea, probably the most common tea.
See it in advertisements all the time.
Right. This is the classic tea of the 18th century. Oolongs. They also had oolongs and trying not to catch on fire.
Or as some people would call them, oolongs.
Yeah, oolongs. Gunpowder tea. So this is actually a green tea where the leaves are curled up, rolled up into little grains like gunpowder. It's not got gunpowder in it.
It just looks a little bit
Looks
like it.
like gunpowder. Gunpowder tea time period, that's what they called it, and that's what we call it. We also have the El Popular chocolate, which is probably the closest thing you're going to find to a chocolate of the 18th century. And so it's already got some spices in it and some, whatever. It comes in these cubes and you break it off and you make hot chocolate with it, just like it did in the 18th century. Of course, loaf, we talked about loaf sugar, and these are our little sugar cones. Now, some sugar cones in the 18th century were like this high, right? And
Ours aren't that big.
Giant cones of sugar. But they also had these small cones of sugar, and they would come in blue paper, and they were sealed up, and they would have sugar nippers, and they'd bust it off.
And you need another drink there?
Of course, we already mentioned the toddy rod or the mulling poker, which we also have on our website. And these are made out of not mild steel like everything is made today, but this is made out of wrought iron. And the actual content of the metal really changes the flavor that gets put into it. And that's one of the reasons why these are made out of wrought iron. Which they don't really make they don't make it today. So it's all made out of old wrought iron.
I do think that's so unusual that we don't really think about how metal changes the flavor of things very much. Because
we cook
we're
everything
very
in stainless
protected,
steel.
right? It's all stainless steel, very, very tasty. But it really,
It
like
makes a
silver, if you drink out of it, it's definitely got a flavor to it.
Yeah, in fact, some of the stuff, some of the very, very interesting things that I found having to do with this time period and working through these older drinks, I found a whole bunch of great information that came out of the Old Bailey. So a few weeks ago, a few live streams ago, we talked about trials and whatnot. And if you're looking for drink references and hot drink references for the time period, looking through the Old Bailey records gives you an idea of the class of the drink. So if you go specific, so the biggies in our time period, the ones you're going to find the most references to are, hold on, are a hot punch or warm punch, and punch is made with brandy and water and sugar and lemon, generally. And you'd warm that up. You'd have it in a bowl. That bowl right up there over my head, you can't see it there. That bowl up there is a punch bowl. And they would have this big, now that's kind of a normal, smallish, medium-sized punch bowl. It might have a big punch bowl. And you would mix your punch in that, and people would drink out of that. And you would maybe I would like to order a punch bowl. And they would make the punch, bring it in. And so that's the main drink that you'll find. I have probably 20, 30 references to people drinking warm punch in all these different settings. That's kind of a higher level, so let's say middle class, a richer drink. It's made with, more expensive ingredients. But if you go down into the level of people that are interacting in the Old Bailey records, people that get in jail, basically, right? People that get in trouble with the law, they're not drinking hot punch. They're drinking flip. So we have this kind of, a social strata. Now, some of that is strictly the name. Rich people are going to call it a hot punch, and lower class people are going to call it flip. But many times it's actually a different kind of a drink. And it's different because, one of the whole reasons why we have a mixed drink, and this would be called a beverage in the 18th century. A beverage is a mingled drink. So it isn't just, oh, I want a beverage. No, it's like a mix of this and that and something else. In those lower class settings, the reason why you make those mixed drinks is because the component parts aren't very high quality in the first place. So if you want to have something with a bite to it, you want to have a higher alcoholic content. The higher alcoholic content liquors were poor quality. They would have all these strange things in them that would make them taste bad or make you not well. So you would mix them with other ingredients to try to take the edge off of something that doesn't taste good. You'd make a flip, and many times a flip is going to be a mix between an ale or a beer and one of these harsher liquids, inexpensive brandies or whatnots. Now, maybe even something like a rum. Depends on your context and where you're at. If you're in Great Britain, it's more than likely going to be something like a brandy, comes out of France, or something. And in North America, not as much brandy. You're going to have maybe a rum, or if you're really in the back country, you're going to have a whiskey, because that's made with excess components there. Or maybe like a fruit brandy, so a peach or an apple brandy, because there's so much of that fruit there, and you can make it into those components. And I forgot where I was going.
I've been lost because I've been reading questions, so I'm going to ask you a different one.
Anyway,
okay.
So if we look at the Old Bailey records, we find all these references to flip, and people basically some of it actually has to do with the flip itself. Or most of the time, I drank a lot of flip, and then I woke up and all my stuff was stolen. That kind of shows up a lot, right? So here's a theft. All four of us, we paid our reckoning and went to a public house in Bishopsgate Street, and there we had 4 pots of hot flip. And from thence, we went to Whitechapel Road. They got, things got stolen. Here's 1722, and the Old Bailey records are really good at this. They also give us this time, because the Old Bailey records go from, say, 1660-ish, somewhere in there, at least 1680s, they go back that far, to, say, 1830s and 40s. We can see where the terms float in and out of history. So flip starts out as early as, say, 1722, but you don't see it earlier than that. They may have had the drink, called it something else, right? But 1722, that the prisoner having called for a pot of flip, and the company having drank part of that, when the reckoning came to be paid, did refuse to pay the part towards the punch. See, here we say, thence a quarrel arose. Here we have the term, a pot of flip, and then pay towards the punch. So they're using punch as a generic term, and flip fit inside of that. So it's like punch, it's a mixed alcoholic beverage, but it is in the smaller context, it's flip made with, etc., etc. So we have some of these where things are going on like that. Sometimes people are, there's many references to people ordering the flip. It comes in a silver tankard. They swap it out with a pewter tankard and then run out the door. And they stole my... Now, why anybody in a tavern would serve stuff in an expensive vessel, I have no idea. But it happens many, many times in these records. So people are like taking off with a silver spoon. We had that in previous episodes. Well, silver tankards are taking off with them.
Okay, before you move on to the next thing.
Yep.
Okay, so I have a super chat from Mandatory Carrie. Let me find it. Okay, can't make it live, but I'll catch the rerun. When is Ryan doing a video next?
Ryan might well be in this episode. This is likely going to be a longer one, kind of like a mini doc, probably stretching to 15 or 20 minutes, and who knows how long. Depends. I mean, I've already been talking for 45 minutes, and I've barely scratched the surface. Excuse me. But He'll likely be in this one. I'll do the talking, and he'll do
He's the bartender,
the
right?
recipe parts, right?
And then there is a member chat from Speed and Style Tony. Need a Ticonderoga Swizzle Club mug, right?
Oh,
Looks so
yeah.
cool.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the iconography would be on that one. That'd be interesting.
That's true. What would be the right logo
Right.
image? But I mean, that's a cool name.
Could be a spruce tree, or a
That's
tree.
true. That's true. And we have a super chat from Wolfie. Just a super chat. No,
Thank
no
you.
comment. And then quite a few people have been saying thank you for showing up today at the Nutmeg Tavern since you're feeling a little under the weather.
Yeah.
And also, somebody had asked about unlisted past live streams because they can be tricky to find. And I always try to remember, and sometimes it's there and sometimes I forget, but usually there's a link in the description on any live stream to the archives. And I made sure to add the one for the 24 archive into the description for today. So you can go there and look at the playlist of the past videos if you want to find one.
Yeah, so here's the issue with the old live streams is that maybe it's changed because you know what,
Maybe.
YouTube is an ever evolving platform, for the good, for the bad. It's ever evolving, and we don't have all of those live on the channel in public feeds because that generally it messes up the way YouTube works. It sometimes will kind of offer poor isn't the word. It'll offer up live streams that don't fit the audience, and then when YouTube says, "Look, they didn't click on it," and then it thinks the video is bad,
Right,
or
and
it
then
makes
maybe I shouldn't
or
give
the
them any
channel
more
is
live
bad, right?
streams.
And so we're better off making those unlisted. Now, when they're unlisted, that doesn't mean they're not viewable. You just don't have the direct link to it. But we do have those playlists, and they have those unlisted videos in them. It's a lot harder to search in it, but they are there.
Yes, and it's one of the reasons I broke it up into the 24, because I thought it might help people search for like, I can look through this
It was
year.
like 50 live streams in a year.
Yes.
So I'm sure they're all wonderful content, and everyone in the United States should be watching them. In fact, around the world. But that's not how it works.
Okay, so I've got a super chat from Max Arcole. Very fun topic today on hot drinks. Thanks, Townsend's team. And then I have a member chat from Mikey Mike. Seasons greetings, John. Flip back to healthy soon.
Yeah, I'm not terrible. It's just hard to do a lot of talking with.
There aren't quite enough you didn't have enough hot toddies before you started today. That's what. But at least you got your little.
I should have put some French cream in this.
Yes, that's right. Maybe that would have helped. Okay, so I did have another question, and this one is about chocolate. And they were wondering if they mixed the chocolate with milk or if they just mixed it with water. And I wasn't sure if that was covered in the chocolate video.
Yeah, I think most of the time when we look at the recipes, when they talk about it just mixing it with water. But I think there are, I'm only off the top of my head, I think there are some specific references to using milk. And I'm sure that a little French cream in there would probably help it out too.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's that one. Oh, somebody was wondering if there were mentions of warmed fruit juice, rather than like wine or something like that.
The only thing I would say would be having the warmed lemon stuff in the punch. Mm-hmm. Now, there are references to warmed up cider.
Oh.
Right?
Yes.
But again, the cider that they're talking about is an alcoholic beverage. So basically kind of like a wine or a beer made with apple juice. So, we us calling what we generally call here in the United States cider is like calling Welch's grape juice wine. right? Their cider was always alcoholic. And I mean, and if they would have drank in the cider like we drink cider, at least here, it's like, well, this isn't done. I mean, you just squeeze some apples. What's the point of this, right? So that was a warmed up alcoholic cider.
Did they talk about spicing it, or were they just warming it up?
You're just warming it up.
Okay. Somebody had asked earlier if they cooled beer. So they were talking about maybe like putting the kegs in a river. Okay.
Wait. Let me see if I can find the reference. I might not be able to find. I'll just have to give you the off the top of John's head. Hobnob, right? Hob or knob? Can I find it? So there's somewhere. Oh yeah, here it is. Found it. I was lucky. Hob or knob? Will you hob or knob with me? A question formally in fashion at polite tables, signifying a request or challenge to drink a glass of wine with the prosperer or with the proposer. If the party challenged the answer knob, you were to choose whether red or white or red. This foolish custom is said to originate in the days of Good Queen Bess. Thus, when great chimneys were in fashion, there was at each corner of the hearth or grate a small elevated projection called a hob, and behind it a seat. In the wintertime, the beer was placed on the hob to warm, and the cold beer was set on a small table, and it was said to have been called the knob, so that the question, will you have hob or knob, seems only to me have meant, will you have warm or cold beer? How's that for a strange little thing? So they, specifically were, and we have somewhere in our collection, which I really need it for the episode, and I doubt I'll be able to find it, an ale shoe for beer that you would probably use for warming up anything, like I want a warm cider or warm beer or a warmed ale. It would be a mug, like a tin mug that would kind of look like this, but it had this projection out of it, made out of tin, and it was made out of tin, and you would push that into the coals, and it would heat up your beer for you.
Whoa.
So you'd have a nice warm beer.
Yum, yum.
That's what I always wanted. Or a warm cider. And I thought this was interesting, this hobnob kind of, it's, do you want it hot, do you want it cold kind of question. I don't know, exactly whether that, they're talking, again, kind of historically and about what things were really called in the time period. That's seems kind of a historical context there. Did that answer the question? I have no idea.
Well, don't ask me. I've been reading the chat. I've got very distracted. Retro Nook gifted a couple of Townsend's memberships.
Thank you so much.
Somebody was asking about posset, and so I dropped the links to the posset videos that we've done.
Yes.
And so...
Yeah, posset's one of those really good, questions about, is it a hot drink? Is it really kind of more like a pudding? It kind of, you can kind of drink a posset. They even had special posset cups, but, so we were talking about whether to include posset in this episode. We're going to talk about eggnog. We're going to talk about burnt wine. We're going to talk about warm punch. Flip, which is possibly shortened from flip-flop, which has to do with the mixing of it back and forth. There are some other fun names, like hot pot. So sometimes
this seems to really inspire great names, all these hot alcoholics.
Well, if you really want all the names, you get them out of the Dictionary of the Vulgar Tongue. So, so a mixed alcoholic beverage, there's bumbo or rumbo, if it's made with rum instead of brandy. There's braggot. There's pearl, which is ale mixed with wormwood. Yum. Doesn't sound good at all. Here's one, Connie Wobble. which is eggs and brandy heated up together. Doesn't sound like my favorite thing. We talked about calabogus. Here's one, 6 and Tips, which is whiskey and small beer. Sometimes if you have a weak beer or weak punch, you would call it just water bewitched, right? It's just basically water with a little bit, like hardly anything in it, right? Then we've got punch. We talked about that. And here's one that's called Doctor. Now talk about impossible to do any other research. How are you supposed to search for doctor and not get every other, right?
Yes.
You can't find it when it's
How
actually
would you
meaning
make it
this.
drink specific?
Right, you can't get it to drink specific. So doctor here is milk and water with a little rum and some nutmeg. And also name of a composition used by distillers to make spirits stronger. So I doctored it, right? So I put more, like it would be like mixing like a high alcoholic beverage, say really something cheap, like Everclear or something to spice up the alcoholic content. There's a mixture that shows up in Dickens called steaming bishop. And bishop is from the 18th century, a mixture of wine and water, which is put roasted orange. And so it's really hard to research bishop like you would try to research. You type in, okay, find me all the references to bishop. You're going to find 1,000 religious references and.
How do you find your drink ones?
Yeah, how do you find the drink one, right?
Again, very tricky.
You know about grog, right? We talked about grog. There's crank. No, not what you're thinking, but this is gin and water. We've got the references for punch. We've got there's all these. Oh, here we go. Humpty Dumpty, which is sometimes ale boiled with brandy. There's Huckle and Buss, which shows up in the Old Bailey records. Huckle and Buss shows up, and I think she says it's brandy and eggs. I don't know. I'd have to look through my 30 pages to find it. But that one, I mean, here in the Vulgar Dictionary, now this is funny. So in the Old Bailey, it's called Huckle and Buss. Here in the Vulgar Dictionary, probably 20, 30 years later, Huckle my butt. Don't ask me.
The game of telephone.
Right, exactly. It morphs and morphs and morphs, right? Twist is a mixture of half tea, half coffee, or likewise brandy, beer, and eggs.
Those two are not the same.
Right? And then, yeah. So.
Okay, before you move on to the next stop. Okay, so hold on. Oh, where'd it go? Sorry. Oh, so Spoon Style Tony has a super chat. Any drinks that mixed alcohol with chocolate?
So far, I haven't done any searches. I haven't found. So when I start thinking on that realm, and it's just like there's 100 things you could search for, and you have to look for the the weak
Each
spots.
one. And you haven't noticed any chocolate without?
I have not done any specific chocolate research yet for that.
Well, I think this has been so helpful because, we've got a lot of people with their hot drink ideas, and so it's been kind of nice to flesh out. You're like, I hadn't thought about that one yet, or really kind of dug into that.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't find some references, and the implication is there that you would put the French cream into your chocolate the same way you would put it into tea or coffee.
And Seven Dust gifted Townsend memberships. Thank
you.
you. And hold on, there's a member chat. They're a little harder to find. Okay, Susan LeWay says, excited for the festive season with some Rumbo.
Yeah, there we go.
And then on that, somebody had asked earlier about in the time period, the holiday season, and what, and like gatherings, social gatherings, and what would have spurred those. And it was making me think about Epiphany, which we don't celebrate very much, but I thought you might want to talk about it a bit.
Yeah, so, and that's part of what this, like I started out the beginning of this episode, when we talked about the idea of, it being cold and needing warm drinks, and the holiday season for us tends to be sort of that time between Thanksgiving and Christmas. But here in this context, at least in Great Britain and possibly, and it's hard to necessarily, you can't necessarily always transfer it, but sometimes you can. For North America, that time is really a month later. It goes from Epiphany or the 12th day of Christmas, right, into the entire month of January. And the reason for that probably, I'm just, kind of working through this. And this is one of the reasons why I go to primary content or primary research rather than just like, hey, I think this is what's true. Because I can think anything and that doesn't mean it's true. But, we get into January and it's just not the season when you want to do it. You can't do anything outdoors, right? You're not doing any agriculture, which is what the majority of people's job is in the time period. Even if it is your job, workshops are cold. People aren't interested in buying things in the wintertime. It's just, it's kind of everything collapses. But there is at least one journal that I've got that's from this 18th century time period. And he talks about going, this whole January season is one where you go and just, you have parties with other people. I went to this person's house. I went to that person's house. Probably because there's nothing else to do. And it's, the most easy time of year to take out of your work schedule to socialize. Nobody else has anything to do. You don't have anything to do. Let's get together and drink warm alcoholic beverages. That's like what's happening.
And catch up, right? It's the perfect time to...
He talks about getting into February and it's like, woo, thank goodness I can stop partying. I can finally, get back to, not being debauched all the time or whatever it is. So, I think there's definitely that going on.
It's party time, and it's the perfect time for a
right,
drink
and
season.
it's January, not December.
Yeah. Somebody was wondering about, we had talked a little bit about warmed milk earlier. And had you run across any drinks that were specifically for insomnia? Because, of course, that's what
Yes, yeah. There's at least one reference in this giant pile of paper where it talks about, oh gosh, can I find it? I know, I'm sure I can find it. It's a funny story.
Somebody was making the comment earlier that you flipping through your papers is like Gandalf looking through and looking for the things about the ring. Yeah.
There's something in here somewhere. So yes, there's references to helping people sleep. But I made a little note, so I will be able to find it. Another thing about hot punch and flip specifically in that kind of lower class thing is that you'll see a lot of that happening where they're talking about sailors drinking that. It's like a lot of these low class things start out with sailors. I wonder why. Eggnog is where you see sailors talking about eggnog first, before regular people do. So it kind of starts off with those terrible sailors and then moves into regular society. So I'm going to find it. I am. I know I put a note on it. Okay, maybe I won't be able to find it. And I'll just have to give you the story out of the top of my head. So what happens is a doctor, I believe it's a doctor, and he wants to go to sleep. He's either been ill or whatnot, and he orders up a warm punch, and the warm punch comes to the table, or comes to his bedroom. Yep, I missed it. It's in here someplace. The warm punch comes to his bedroom. He falls asleep before he drinks it. And then the person who's sharing his room with you, which is happening all the time in the 18th century, they would basically have 3 or 4 rooms in an inn or whatever. And I mean, it's like just random people would sleep in the bed with you, right? And that's happening, right? And the other person in the room sees it and sees he's asleep. The person drinks it all up. And then the doctor wakes up in the morning. He's like, "Whew, I slept so well. It was because I drank that warm punch." So there you go.
Okay, we're here.
We did it. You know what? You guys have helped so much with this. I mean, literally, you heard 2%. 2% of what I've dug up. But, you know, the bones are there. And, you know, we will spend who knows how long kind of figuring out the pieces that we want to put together into our episode that'll be 12 to 30 minutes long. And, you know, I will spend another day of, you know, and I'll feel stupid I'll be nervous and I'll feel dumb at the beginning of the day when we start shooting the episode, feeling like I haven't even scratched the surface. And the reality is that I don't have time to do anything more than scratch the surface. It's lucky that, and one of the reasons why, you know, I can do this is because I've done it so long that all that scratching that I did in the last 15 years, there's little bits of it here, you know, here and there. And so I kind of know where to dig in and try to find it. It's crazy. But that's how episodes are done. I mean, it's, you know, it's kind of beating this stuff
right, you
up.
throw everything into the well and you take something out and you're like, oh, I wonder what's...
And sometimes I'll spend a day of researching on a topic that I think is great and there's nothing there. You know, it's just like I'll never hit the vein to dig in and be able to go with it. And that's why it's so hard when people say, oh, why don't you just do an episode on X, you know? And it's like, well, I could waste 8-12 hours.
But sometimes you'll circle back. Sometimes someone will suggest something or you'll think of something and you won't, you can't find it. And then 3 years later, you hit a vein and you're like, aha.
That's right. And
I remember.
And you're like, oh, now yes. I can go do that. And what's really bad is when you're just searching for a vein and you don't even know what the topic is going to be, right? You're just like, well, I'm just going to start reading stuff.
And I love live streams for that because it doesn't need to be as specific. Sometimes you just get to share a fun vein you found with people. Right. You're like, I just found this great artist. We're going to look at some work or something like that. It's great.
I mean, it's a miracle that, you know, we get to dig in as much as we get to dig in. And, you know, every day, every year, more and more things that were written in the 18th century get scanned and OCR'd so that you can just do searches, you know, you know, in some ways. And this is what's so, I mean, I don't want to get, you know, it's not political, but kind of down on modern technology. That's what's so incredibly dangerous about AI today is that right now, our versions of AI that we have giving us information on Google or whatnot, it makes stuff up. And you can type into some AI thing and say, you know, hey, is there information on XYZ from, you know, pre-1830, whatever? And it will lie to you. It will say, oh yeah, here's a quote and it's from this. And you'll go to find it and it's not there. It's just coming up with some words. And so it's incredibly dangerous as we move forward in time that we allow more and more of AI to do research for us because it doesn't care whether it's actually true or not. And if it starts to, like with image generation and other generation of text and whatnot, it could easily make fake books, and we would not be able to tell the difference. So, not something I'm excited about. Might be good for something, but boy, it's scary when you're in my realm and all of a sudden it's like, so I have to question whether this is a real thing or a not real thing? Not good, not good. Okay.
Are you going to tell people what this week's video is? Is it the Christmas Marathon
Yes,
this week?
we're doing Christmas Marathon on Sunday. Lots of fun episodes on Christmas food because everybody enjoys a nice few hours of good, fun, historical cooking content. So that's going to be that, and we'll have this one probably out for next Sunday. Lots of great, interesting drinks, and there was a question about, I don't know. I was thinking about that. What do you do about non-alcoholic beverage?
Oh yes, somebody had asked.
Kind of fits with that.
In a recipe, we'd been, and so often there are alcoholic, components to a recipe, and they were asking what to use as substitution.
Yeah.
Because
what do you use for substitution? If
just
it's got
more
wine,
water.
if it's got sack in it,
Yeah.
if it's got this or beer in it or whatever, and it's like, guess what? What's the alcoholic or non-alcoholic version of that? You can get non-alcoholic beers. You can use something like regular cider instead of hard cider. You can use grape juices or sparkling wines instead of wines, and you'll get kind of the same flavors. It's not going to be exactly the same. There's only so much you can do with that. But generally, there's just a small portion of the recipe and not a major component. So thank you so much for all your great encouragement. So many great questions in the chat today. It's a good topic, and it should make a great episode. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Ivy. Thank you, Super Chat, Patreon, regular YouTube members. Are you folks that support us by purchasing merch and the fun things we have on our website? You help make these episodes happen, and you help make me do hours and hours of crazy research looking for strange things on the internet, because that's what I do. I hope you have a very wonderful weekend, and thank you for watching today.